This is what I used to tell people. I don't need a ride. I have a car. You're not telling me no. You're telling the battalion commander no. You know, like I don't have a request. Like
Yeah,
all of my
exactly.
requests are fulfilled. It's the battalion commander's request. Like,
Welcome back to the Humorless Lab. This is episode 3, part 2 of our Infantry Battalion S-4 series. If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to part 1, please go back and do so where we set the stage. Thanks.
The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only. We do not represent the U.S. Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. As the hosts of this podcast, we also understand the risk we are undertaking by expressing our opinions, but we do so for the betterment of our 0402 community. If you have any concerns about anything you hear, please contact the producer listed in the podcast description. We hope you enjoy the show and that you'll look into our other community tools on Facebook, Discord, and Teams. Thanks for being here. Semper Fidelis. We jump in mid-conversation where we're talking through roles and responsibilities and expectation management for logistics officers in the infantry battalion.
Everybody's nodding violently up and down. Yes. Managing expectations. I definitely see that as a role and I didn't understand it right as a younger lieutenant. And as I grew up in the Marine Corps, I've kind of understood, hey, you are the person that's having to protect everybody below you and make sure that expectations are managed. I definitely was that guy that was saying, yeah, I can do whatever. And I'm sure my Marines suffered for it a lot of the time. So it's good lessons. So with that, we're going to transition to OPSO relationship and managing expectations between the S4 shop and the S3 shop. Any additional things other than what we've talked about so far on managing expectations between the two shops?
Yeah, so this one's kind of near and dear to my heart because I had two different OPSOs and really kind of a third one, but only for a short time as a 4, and two different ops chiefs as well. So that whole team changed over, and it was night and day different. Kind of having not only in my capabilities, but in the OPSO's capabilities at the time. So not only that, but my log chief checked in as a sergeant and promoted to staff sergeant and stayed my log chief for 3 years. So I had the same chief for 3 years. So the two of us were extremely close, and his relationship with the ops chief was much different going forward from one ops chief to the next one. And that made a world of difference. Him being in the ops chief's hip pocket and me being in the OPSO's hip pocket made everything easier for us for the second go around when we had a different ops chief. And that's an ops chief master guns trusting a boot staff sergeant with things that just normally that relationship doesn't really exist. And we're talking about an 04XX and an 03XX. So I mean, even just compounding all of the kind of human factors that go into that, you can see how that'd be kind of challenging. But I think that's something to navigate, especially if you're the 4 and you have the ability to kind of affect that and make sure you're dragging your log chief to some of these meetings that the ops chief is also in. And yeah, I would always, as Scott said earlier, I would stick to whatever the OPSO is doing. A good OPSO will go to the CO. They'll talk through plans and commander's guidance. They'll make a plan and they'll go to the 4 and grab the 4 and say, hey, 4, like, can we do this? This is what I'm thinking. This is what the CO is thinking. And if you have a good 3, you'll and if you're thinking ahead as well, then you'll be able to give them the is this supportable? Is it not? That kind of thing. And give them some rudder steer before they go back to the CO and say, we're good, sir. Like the battalion's going to do this. And the first OPSO I had just didn't understand that. I didn't really understand it as well either because I was so new and I was still like trying to figure out how to not drown. I was treading water, but the second OPSO, he's the weapons company commander for their first deployment. So we knew each other as captains. He promotes, he's now a major, but he knows how much the 4 affects everything. So he brought me in on everything. And I think that made a huge difference for me. But yeah, definitely log chief is one of those things you got to think about when it comes to, managing expectations is how the log chief and the ops chief talk to each other as well. But how you do things with the OPSO and even sometimes the company commanders helps, make sure that everyone understands what the 4 is capable of and and what you're able to do. And then also sometimes if they understand your capabilities in depth, they know when you're flexing, when you're doing something that's way out of your lane or way out of your league, and they recognize that, you know, a little more than, you know, sometimes they just ask all the time, ask, and you always say yes, and you go behind the scenes and jump through a bunch of hoops and make a bunch of things happen that normally you wouldn't be able to do. And then they start thinking that that's the new bar, that the new standard, and now you're just getting into trouble. But I'll let someone else I'm sure we have similar experiences on that one, but yeah, definitely setting expectations is important.
In terms of expectations, I had a good experience with that because when I joined my battalion, I had 12 other second lieutenants all join at the same time. It was a serious boot drop, right? Like all of us lieutenants showed up at the same time, and all of those lieutenants went and became platoon commanders. And eventually all of those platoon commanders grew up into XOs for the companies and were spread throughout the battalion. And the relationship, not just between the S4 and the company commanders, but also, remember now, the staff, right? Between your 4 Alpha, your MMO, your MTO, motor transport officer, all those lieutenants now also communicating through all the other lieutenants in the battalion. Depending on how tight all the lieutenants are with their Lieutenant Protection Association or whatever your battalion calls it, them being able to communicate with each other and talk to each other and build expectation management and cover for each other and help each other out, that affects a lot too. So for the lieutenants who are listening to this that are going to an infantry battalion or to a battalion in general and not quite seeing how they fit into the picture, that is a huge way you fit into the picture, is you are building expectation management from your level and helping your boss in the foreshop then deliver results, right? Under promise, over deliver. Understanding all those relationships is super important. So thank you. I didn't want to lose the beat on that.
You just made me think. When I was at 2-3, I had a second UDP. He came in on the first one too. Man, this guy, he ended up being the bull lieutenant, an 0402. He was the biggest bro. I'm like, how is he? He ended up being the MMO, and he's like barking orders at these XOs like as a second lieutenant. But because he was like, he'll know who he is, because he's like this surfer, super cool dude that had like the parties at his house, and he actually lived across the street from me. He got a lot of stuff done. So for you lieutenants out there, you can make your job a lot easier on that end. I'd say I'll be honest, I had some phenomenal opsos and still that I've learned a lot from, that I've worked with. So I never quite had that like shut up and get it done type attitude. Mainly, I think that's a product of being at 3rd Marines. Just because you can yell at me all you want to, but you ain't gonna get the $14 million you need for the charter aircraft. So, well, we're gonna have to address this like men, or we're just not gonna go anywhere. So that definitely did help. But I would say, hopefully, if you're out there, get your opso to listen to this. Like, hey, we got a podcast and you guys need to talk to you. They really need to involve the 4. And part of that is, it was kind of Colonel Cayley did this to us when we were at COB7, and he made us do kind of like a business sell sheet of your capabilities. So, and he made us break it into like sections. So I started as a platoon commander and a company commander and an opso, but essentially what we came up with is a advertising pamphlet. I don't know if you remember this, Kevin. It might have been just with Josh and Paul Harrison, but like, and then we would just go around advertising our capabilities. Like, hey, we can do 3 companies at one time simultaneously, but we can only do that every 4 days. We can do this many pallets of ammo. So it just kind of had us like as an advertisement of what of our capabilities were. I took that mentality to the 4. So we go to the OPSO and it's like, here's the organic capabilities. You can yell all you need to, but like this is what I had to be able to move. I need 72 hours to talk the regiment. If we want to move above that, unless you want to call the regimental OPSO, then you could call him and he can make it happen sooner. You know what I mean? So it's like, and if you can come to your OPSO with a yes attitude, we can do anything you want, boss. It all comes at a cost. You're like, sure, I'm sure we can move a company tomorrow morning at 05. Who are you going to call? Regimental commander? I don't know. But it's possible if you can make a phone call. but I thought that was useful.
I do remember that cell sheet as working in the foreshop and still trying to understand how all the different units supported the battalions. And obviously, in 7th Marines on 29 Palms, CLB7 was busy, right? You always had somebody else to go help. But being able to package it up and understand where the different units supported different capabilities, because I think you had one and then CEB copied, or I don't know who copied who, but they also had one with their capabilities, right? What they could support. So we had a menu of what to support, what to request. And that then allowed us to inform our battalion what was available to them and kind of set expectations, just like we're talking about, so everybody was on the same page. It's good.
I would also argue that what's really important as the 4 is sometimes your boss may not know or may just disregard the fact that you are a staff officer. And so being in the room in those conversations with the 3 as they're developing plans, even if you have no input or conversational piece whatsoever in it, you are there to participate and to soak everything in so you can go back and start your plan right away and come to the table with options. I think that's very important, and something that, especially as a young officer, just having the cojones to go, hey, I would like to be a part of that conversation. So that way I have a better understanding of what you're expecting, not only of me, but also of my Marines.
Yeah. And sometimes it means just holding your tongue as the conversation is happening and knowing when you should or should not interject yourself. Sometimes waiting until the conversation is over and then going and talking to whoever was talking to whoever behind closed doors, being like, listen, man, this is how this is going to now hurt me. We're gonna make sure we support it, but just so you understand, this is all the risk that we now just incurred as a staff to try and figure this stuff out. That's good.
You know what's funny we did not talk about, and it's not even on there, is your boss. How do
The
you
XO?
that
Chief of
tells you
Staff.
how funny it's just kind of funny how the XO, like, what I'm interested to hear, Dan, like, I had like my first XO, Snake Eater, Marsoc dude, loved him, like, super awesome guy, like, had my back. Was like, what do you need? Most of the time it's like particular, but just anybody, it's hard to explain what I need. So you're just like, sir, I'm good. I got it. We're making it happen. And then the second one, EWS instructor, super smart, loved the 4, hated infantry officers for some reason. But like super had my back to the point where I felt bad for the XOs. So I would like try to have try to like bring them in the fold, like, hey, dude, hey, we're just gonna say this week, okay? But I need you to work on this. It's just interesting to hear your thoughts, Dan.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I had that with the second OPSO to the company commanders, and that chain was, I almost had to stop telling him if the company had completely screwed something up because he was going to go down there and just crush someone. So I had the ops on my side. I had very different XOs. I had one, the first XO was like out of the fleet he hadn't been in the fleet for 6 years and then became a battalion XO. So he didn't know GCSS what, like he didn't know anything when it came to maintenance, supply, and we'll talk about lieutenants. The supply officer reported me for the first deployment. So I was translating to him everything supply and log to help him understand so he could frame then for the boss things too. So in a lot of ways, I was teaching the XO supply S4 maintenance stuff. And then because he didn't know, he micromanaged a lot because he didn't know. So he wasn't comfortable. So he had to ask a lot of questions. He had to be in my business a lot, which was it was annoying, but at the same time, I kind of understood why. And then the second XO was almost like the battalion support field grade officer when it came to like morale, because the CO was hitting everyone hard. And so the XO was more laid back. He was a prior enlisted infantryman, and he understood the CO was hitting everyone pretty hard. And he was much more easy to work with. He trusted me, and I had a good relationship with him. So I had, my second kind of run through being a 4 was like the OPSO was phenomenal. The XO was easy to work with. The CO was good. So it was totally different experience for me. But I think the XO, you have to keep them informed. And if you're talking about, the relationship with your RS, it's one of those things too, where sometimes you kind of have to tell the CO something, the CO needs to know, and maybe you got to walk to the XO's door and let him know what you're about to tell the CO, and maybe he's going to walk you back, or maybe you're just going to have to go out alone and stick your neck out. But I didn't have to have too many of those conversations. But it's one of those things where, your relationship with the XO is very important, and how they manage you can have a huge impact on, not only the lieutenants of the 4, but the rest of the staff officers too, because you're really kind of the senior. Sometimes you might be the senior of all of the other ones. The Adj is lieutenant, the 6 is probably lieutenant. So there's another kind of level or echelon that they're managing too. But yeah, the XO relationship is extremely important. And we talked about expectations earlier. You got to do that with them as well, I think.
Yeah. I definitely felt at times as the XO's XO with all the other staff officers, just because, just because they're like, they come sit in my office, like, so I think we lost the radio. What do I tell the boss? Well, you know who you are out there. How long has it been? Before we get too crazy, what have you done about it? Yeah, it's funny. Forgot about that.
It's funny hearing these conversations, since I was never obviously in an infantry battalion. I always had a direct line with the CO, which was great. But this past week, we had retired 3-star generals mentoring us through our OPTs, and we had an admiral. And I'll never forget, he said the first threat that you have to identify and recognize is your boss. And what he meant by that is how does he receive information? How do you need to deliver it in a way that he is going to actually listen to respond rather than just hear you? So I taught myself early, try to figure out how that needs to be said. Like we had a rollover accident once, but instead of going to the boss and saying, "Hey, sir, we had a rollover accident," start with, "First of all, sir, no one's injured." Now he'll be ready to receive the rest of the information despite the cost, because it's not going to be a, "Oh my gosh, what have we done for everything else? Are the Marines okay?" Because at that point, he's not going to listen anymore. So understanding how your boss receives information as well is very important, whether that's the CO or XO. And I really liked what you said, Scott, about, hey, the radio, that XO coming in, he can help you modify how you need to say what you need to say so that the boss actually listens and doesn't just hear.
Yeah, saying that the S4 is the XO's XO is a good perspective. In our battalion, we definitely got to the point where all of our logistics support requests also had the comm section on there and other support assets within the battalion, just to streamline all of their requests, because it made our life easier as the 4 shop, instead of getting out to a range and realizing that they actually hadn't coordinated with any other S section in our battalion. It was easier to just kind of manage all of it and make sure that we were the final touch point to make sure that all the combat service support was linked together to whatever we were doing. So yeah, that was a good thing that happened in our battalion. Jess, what you just said made me think of a guide or a wisdom that came from this book, Never Split the Difference, which is about, I think he's an FBI negotiator. Anyway, one of the things that came out of that was he was talking about how when you're negotiating with somebody or you're talking to somebody, you're going to give them bad news. You're supposed to tell them that you have bad news and then wait for them to absorb it and be ready to accept the bad news before you tell them the bad news. If you just launch straight with the bad news, then they can have an emotional reaction to the bad news. I don't know.
Yeah, Jess has the best starting line. Boss, nobody's dead. You ready?
Everybody's okay. You ready for some bad news?
It can only go up from there. So if you start with nobody's dead, nothing seems that bad anymore. We're missing a rifle. Okay, well, that's something we can manage.
Yes.
Maybe it'll just be the start for everybody. Nobody's dead. Okay.
Yeah, PSA, I don't recommend starting that every time. Just, yeah.
So OPSO, XO relationships, that's good. The CO, company commanders bit, Dan, could you just talk through what you said in the break, the drive-by stuff? That'd be good.
I'll talk through the difference I saw in COs, and having a CO CO to CO relationship. So company commanders having the ability to walk directly into the CO's office, the battalion commander, and say, this is my plans, or this is my training plan, this is what I want to do. And the battalion commander either enabling them or understanding that what they're trying to do is in line with their intent, and then just saying go. And then the company commander kind of back briefing the staff, or not back briefing the staff, especially in my case. And now all of a sudden I'm out in the dark about why all of a sudden your ammo request is so important, or why, this or the other thing is so important for Bravo company, because they are doing some training event that the OPSO barely even knows about, or the OPSO then is kind of forced, their hand is forced because the CO has already talked to the battalion commander about it. So kind of understanding staff relationships and being able to kind of see where that is too. If you can see where how the power circle, I guess is what we should call it, up there on the command deck and between the COs, how that's working, it's something you want to identify as well. Is how is that relationship? For me, it was, I would get a call from the XO asking me, well, why are all of Bravo company's MVGs deadlined? Like, I don't know, sir. I haven't heard anything. No one's told me that. It's like, well, the company commander heard from some armory custodian who's a lance corporal that, no validated information has gone and told the custodian for Bravo company. So he runs up and tells his CO that all MVGs are deadlined. And then he tells the battalion commander without telling the XO or the OPSO, because there's no relationship there, right? So I had to start understanding, well, I need to be more in tune with what the company commanders are doing, and I need to help them trust me with information so I can help fix their problems before I'm getting, direct, questions from the XO about something I don't even know about, which just then it makes me look like I don't know what's going on. But that's kind of that was in a more of a toxic command climate, I would say, or not toxic, but just not toxic, but dysfunctional was probably the better way to describe it, because I don't think any of that was on purpose. But yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on, and a different relationship. You are this primary staff officer for the CO, but you probably don't want to exercise that extremely often unless you have to. So,
as we talk about all the different relationships and everybody learning their jobs and our experiences working with different staff officers, it shouldn't look like, hey, we're just poking people in the chest and saying that they screwed up. This is a learning experience, and we're fooling ourselves if we think that we're all experts on how to do our jobs in the battalions, in whatever unit we're in. I think that there's a propensity in our profession to need to be confident. There is a requirement in our job to be confident in the actions that we're taking, the decisions that we're making, 100%. But at the same time, being humble and looking back and saying, yeah, I didn't handle that the way that I should have, is important for the development of our staff and the people that are working with us. It's important for ourselves. And hopefully everybody that's listening to this understands that the whole point of this is not to complain about past relationships or the things that we've seen that have been done wrong. It's to learn from it and get better at it so that we can be more effective staff officers, infantry officers, whatever. I think it's important to capture that somewhere in this podcast, because some infantry officer somewhere is listening to this going, logistics officers. Okay. I'll cut that piece out. All right. Good job, guys. Thank you. We'll move to the section now on managing lieutenants for the first time, possibly, working with lieutenants and understanding our role as captains now in an S-4 position in an infantry battalion and how that works. And then hopefully get some perspectives from outside the infantry battalion and what that looks like.
I mentioned during the first podcast, one of the hardest things for me being an S4, coming from being like a TS company commander and having lieutenants being responsible for their training, your scope as a captain at that point is just leadership. I mean, you got a mass sergeant in the motor pool that's managing resources, right? You have an XO that's managing training. You got the first sergeant, he's good order and discipline. And so you're just, you're there providing leadership, violently executing commander's intent. And so there's a lot of like unit training management type stuff and TMEs and fuzzy talks, all the commander stuff. And then you go to be an S4 and you still have inexperienced lieutenants that need leadership, like the same lieutenants, the same second lieutenant graduated school. But now I have a job and it's, yes, you are my person and I need to take care of you, but I felt terrible. I'll be honest with you. I love all everybody I've served with for the most part, but there's a special place in my heart for infantry battalion lieutenants, and it sounds like wing from what Jess said, just because they did not have the love and coddling leadership that I had, nor did the lieutenants in my companies have the love or coddling leadership that they had. So it's just, I think for a 4, just go in expecting that. Obviously Marines are number 1. You can say what you need to say, but you still got phase mode coming up. You still got ITX coming up. I mean, you're probably working till 2200 anyways, and you still don't have enough time in the day to just walk down to the motor pool and tell your motor chief platoon commander about your convoy time in Afghanistan and things that you learned for PCCs and PCIs. And it's just tough, man. And I just, I don't know. I think now I have a lot less hubris. And 123. So I'll bring over truck companies, company commander, and be like, hey man, I'd love to, I was a TS company commander. I want to just lean into this lieutenant and give her all the knowledge because I loved it. It was amazing. I could say, but I just don't have time to. Can you? You know what I mean? So it's just been, I didn't do that at an infantry battalion. I was too young, and I didn't have enough humility by then. Try to do it all. But I would say, if you can, for you fours, don't be don't delegate your leadership responsibilities to other captains. But you are busy, and if they can learn from somebody in their field, I would say try to give them the opportunity.
Yeah, I want to reply to this since we're on that train. That's a soundbite. I mean, don't delegate your leadership responsibility, but at the same time, it's, there's a lot you're balancing. I was never a company commander. I was never a lieutenant that reported to a captain. So I had no understanding or expectation or example set. So here I am, the S4, and now I have also the supply officer, who is a brand new second lieutenant out of the schoolhouse. And it was definitely tough. And for me, I kind of cheated the system. I had a lot of strong lieutenants. Some of them were prior enlisted that didn't need a lot of that hand-holding. I mean, my S4 Alpha was brand new from the schoolhouse, was 13-year staff sergeant that was extremely competent from a, AAB battalion background. So knew about maintenance as well, going in, and knew about just staff functions and things. So I didn't have to do a lot of leadership of my S4 Alpha just because he was already there, but I was a little bit spoiled in that respect. I think it's definitely a challenge in being the S4 and leading and spending the time, being able to get out of your office and go down to the motor pool. Great example, Scott. Sometimes it's hard to do that when the XO is in your office every 30 minutes asking about something, and when there's other stuff going on. But I definitely think it's something you need to take seriously. And if you can do that, then as a 4, then you're doing a lot of things that maybe other 4s don't get the chance to do. And you're also getting feedback from the lieutenants. If you spend more time trying to help them, you'll understand what their problems are. And sometimes their problems are analogous to the rest of the battalion, right? So the motor T officers have an issue. Well, sir, no one ever comes to motor stables. We're set up, and we think, it's like, when you hear that, then that gives you an idea of well, maybe I should probably figure out how to make that happen better. So that's something that I think maybe there's 2 ways, there's 2-way feedback. And that's something that sometimes we don't get. A lot of times, the reps dictated down, and there's not a lot of feedback back up the chain. But yeah, I definitely think it was something I wasn't prepared for, and I could have done better. But I also kind of lucked out with a lot of my lieutenant situations. And I mean, one of the other lieutenants checked in the same time I did. He's prior enlisted guy that then stayed for the 3 years I was there. So, I mean, we built a relationship. He became the 4 Alpha. He promoted to captain when I was there. I mean, we spent a lot of time together, and I think that just isn't always the case. Sometimes you're going to have someone who's, straight from the schoolhouse and just needs leadership. So definitely something to talk about and something to take seriously when you're the 4, even though it might be a company commander's quote unquote responsibility, it's still your job. So definitely a good point.
Jess, do you have any perspectives?
I don't necessarily from the force shop. I do as the executive officer for MUSH 2, which is the Marine Wing Headquarters Squadron, which was unique in and of itself because that's typically billeted for a pilot. I was the second ground officer to be in that position, which actually I think worked out really well, much like the MWSS, because I was able to bring in that perspective of ground, which is the majority of the Marine Wing Headquarters, so the MAW staff itself. But just to add to those points, it is tough to try and balance your time between what you need to get accomplished, but also making sure you're taking care of those lieutenants. And I think it's even more difficult when you're having to deal with a bunch of different MOSs. So I've had the ADJ, the supply officer, the logistics officer, and then all the deputies as well that I would work with at the MOS staff. So, and they're all brand new. The lieutenants are at least babies. And you just want to do everything you can for them, but you also have to realize that you have to take care of yourself. So it's finding that fine balance, especially if you don't know their MOS. That can be a little bit more challenging, but I think what you do more for them as well is you provide that buffer between them and the bigger staff. So that way they're not getting railroaded all the time and they have an opportunity to grow without being crushed. And I think that's probably the most important thing.
To add to what you said, Jess, in the wing, something that I found really useful that the wing has is First Fridays, and we kind of did this in 29 Palms too, where you had O calls. Often, like the regimental commander would say, like, "I'm going to the O Club on Friday. Come out to the O Club so we can all just get together and talk." And just like the humorless lot, right? Just like this podcast. I mean, an opportunity to connect people and bring people together and talk and just be like, what is your MOS and what do you do? Like, I'm a strategic communications officer. What the heck is that? Like, what is that? There's a bunch of different MOSs out there. And you really feel it in the wing because nobody knows who anybody is, and what they do. Some of them don't care what anybody else does. That'll be a
Like
separate
aviation
podcast.
logistics department.
I'm not going to name any names. That'll be a separate podcast.
That was just a big beast that unless you're in the wing, you would have no idea about. And they're the conduit between blue and green to make things happen. And if you want to know who runs the wing, it's the ALD with the G3.
Yeah. And I think that ties into what we're talking about here with infantry battalions too, right? I mean, as you have to find opportunities as a leader, I think, and this is what I'm getting at, is as a leader, find opportunities to connect people, build relationships and talk stuff out. We have the power to do that by saying, hey, I want all the lieutenants to come to the O Club this Friday. I want these group of people, whatever, and just build the relationships at the end of the day.
Yeah, so the buffer part that Jess mentioned, I had a brand new second lieutenant supply officer. Now, I'm not supply, but now we have a brand new lieutenant partially responsible for keeping the CO out of jail. And also, the supply officer was smart. He knew his stuff, but he didn't know how to talk to senior officers. He didn't know how to frame it. And so a lot of what I did in the beginning was just, he would come to my office and give me the spiel he's about to give the XO or the CO. And I'd be like, okay, look, I'm not going to name him first name. He's awesome, but don't cut that out. And that acronym, I don't even know what that is. So there's no way the XO is going to know what that is. It's stuff like that. And he matured. And then at a certain point, I think it would have been appropriate to do a change in RS and put him under the XO. And at the time, I don't think any of us kind of knew that the sort of the standing procedure nowadays with supply officers, because they all get like up in arms about this, is that supply officer reports to the XO. How dare you let them report to the 4? But at the time, it was, I think, appropriate. And I got to be the buffer, and I learned a bunch about supply too, because I learned a lot of things where, he would brief me and I go, that doesn't sound like that's right. Like, you need to show me an order and you need to show me why this is what it is. And so it helped him learn, it helped me learn. And then we kind of got through it. But yeah, definitely being the buffer as, the S4 to the MMO, that MMO is about to go tell the XO something dumb. You might want to, the MMO might want to talk to you first. And you can let that, the leash out as they get better, but definitely being a buffer and managing lieutenants it's something you have to learn how to do too.
And just to add to that, for the lieutenants listening, understanding the role of the S4 and why he or she is doing that and helping them inform the XO or the commander above them. It's not always micromanagement. Sometimes it really is your boss trying to understand what your job is, or trying to understand how to best communicate it to his or her boss above them.
I was actually going to say that because at that level, at that point, you probably have better idea on how to read the boss more quickly. And you've probably developed that relationship and they don't have it just yet. So again, like you said, Kevin, it is not about micromanagement. It's about keeping their butt out of hot water while developing that relationship with the CO themselves, showing that they're a competent and capable officer. So like you said, Dan, you can let that leash out and you can let them grow into that role. That's huge.
I guess you can edit this out. I do just want to third that, because this is the whole supply officer under the 4 thing is, look, I'm going to be the buffer until you get comfortable speaking to senior officers. And then after that, if he wants to take you on, he can take you. Most of the time, the XO is like, I don't want to talk to this kid. He's a second lieutenant. I don't have time. Like, I'm busy. I don't have time to like listen to him fumble through stuff. Like,
Too bad.
and really, yeah, there comes like a natural progression where it becomes, I think Dan was saying, it's like, I'm tired of being in the office now with the CEO and the suppo talking about how they're going to change serial numbers. When it gets to that, when it gets to that point, then it's time for the XO to, like, I don't need to be here anymore. This is a waste of my time. I need to go be for the OPSO before you start to do something crazy.
That relationship's going to change depending on what battalion you're in, who's reporting to who. It is funny how these like little things that get said in the schoolhouse then translate to the lieutenants that go to the fleet, and they're like, he's going to write my fit rep. Our generational thing were 1302s being told that they can do anything that an 0402 can do, and that they shouldn't listen to us and they should just do our jobs. I can't count how many 1302s I met from my generation, our generation, that like came up to me and said that to me, and I'm just like,
And phasebro teams will perpetuate these things.
yeah.
Can you point me in the direction of these 1302s? Because they were more than happy to tell me they had no idea how to do my job, even though they probably could have done it.
See, it's a generational thing. It's all about what somebody at the schoolhouse says to them. It's funny, like, and the effect that a captain or whatever at the schoolhouse. We'll talk about this in next week, like 2 weeks from now. A captain at the schoolhouse can have on young impressionable lieutenants. I was one of them. I know all about that. So this next section is working with other units. We want to talk through, so starting with doctrinal capabilities, see what objectives need to be reached, identify functional shortfalls based off of concept of logistics support, or calls, as we've referred to it earlier in the podcast, and sync matrix in an operational environment. Who's up first? Coles. Coles, concept of logistics support.
So for me, when it comes to logistics planning, you look at what resources are available, and you need to be able to speak to them in their language. I can't stand this, but you need to, I can't stand truck company telling me they just move packs, or CLB telling me they don't move packs, they just move out. But let's start the conversation. Let's start the conversation with doctrinal baseline, right? So it's just the best way to go about it. And then from there, this is where kind of your combat service report estimate comes into it. You can identify functional shortfalls. Basically, I'm an infantry battalion. This is what I can do, which is not much. You really don't have a lot of logistics capability. So here are my functional shortfalls. And so when I'm going up to hire and I go, well, I don't do PAX movements and I don't move quad cons, but I have to have quad. So it's just you can identify it out for them as far as you don't have the doctrinal capability to do this. So somebody has to figure this out. Out of the units that are supporting this seems like to be the best one that would do it. Now, believe it or not, that'll cause a whole argument in any type of planning conference, even though it's all just common sense. And then the best way I've found to kind of combat that is the sync matrix. And everybody has different versions of this, but I've always liked to, and my OPSOs eventually like it. It's ugly at first because the sync matrix is already big, but I break it down by functional logistics and I go day by day for ammo, and I put it right there on the thing. And what it does is, especially when you get to motor T and embark, you really start to flush out Like, hey, look, I got 6 missions this day. So unless you want the Marines to not sleep, we're going to need support here, regardless if it's in my doctrinal capabilities or not. You can see here that I got too many missions. So just kind of want to throw out there because it's worked well, both active duty, reserves, in the joint world, because it just makes everything pretty transparent for what I've seen.
We'll make sure we get some kind of template put into the team site we've got, where we got all of our CUI information. We'll list an example of an NXD. We'll list an example of a SIG matrix and just put those up there for people to edit, modify, mess around with.
Yeah, I'll get those out there.
It's good.
There are sometimes event specific ones too, but yeah, so on support, and I don't know this from both sides because I was never in a CLB, but the biggest thing I always found I could do to help people supporting me, anything external to the infantry battalion, which is a lot because they have limited capabilities, was to give them my requirements. So as long as I could come to the table with, this is my requirement. I know you don't like it, but I don't have any 7 tons and I can't move these Marines. So I need to move 180 packs. I know that's not what you want to do, but I can't do it any other way other than walking. And all the way up the chain of command is tracking that they're not walking. So got it. But, and then at that point, you can talk to the ops or somebody else about it. But that's one of those things where I think knowing where your shortfalls are and how those translate into requirements for that unit supporting you can pay you a lot of dividends if you know that up front, instead of going out on a limb and saying you need help and not really being able to give someone exactly what that means. And that means you're going to have to go to your battalion and make them provide you what it is they're doing so you can plan appropriately to get those requirements. If you're at ITX, this has happened where I have tanks attached to me and they're like, well, we don't want to give you the FRC, the flat rack refuel capability. If you're not getting that with you and then you have to request fuel from someone else, they're going to want to know how many gallons. And if you don't know, then you're just going to tell them I need fuel and they're going to go, that's great, but you're not helping me plan at all by telling me you just need something. So that's something I would say from my side of it. Every time I'd be trying to get support from external agencies, their biggest question is, what are your requirements? So I'd have to make sure I had all my kind of ducks in a row and everything square before I go to them and say, this is the support I need. And if your OPSO is tracking and your battalion's tracking that too, then that always helps you because they can help fight for you. If someone's saying no, maybe the regiment is saying, no, we can't give you this stuff because we don't want to, because some other battalion is doing things. Well, the regimental commander said that our battalion has a priority right now. So maybe you need to shift those so we get the support, and you can let the ops guys, ops part of the ops and chain of command fight that battle for you, just as long as you know what it is you exactly need, so they know what it is you're asking for. But yeah, that's my one-sided view of it, I guess.
I love that because this is what I used to tell people. I don't need a ride. I have a car. You're not telling me no. You're telling the battalion commander no. Like I don't have a request. Like,
yeah,
my
exactly.
requests are fulfilled. It's the battalion commander's request. Like,
Thanks for listening. That concludes episode 3, part 2 of our Infantry Battalion S-4 episode. We've got one more part, and we're really looking forward to getting that out to you guys. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to other O402s or other Marines who you think will benefit from listening. Looking forward to continuing the conversation.